Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of CKCB Features, the interview show that we do. Anything that's not a true crime story. So, the police are after me, as you can see. Let me lose them real quick. There we go. Got a interesting episode for you today. I'm not sure how many of you might be familiar with the theory that Adam Walsh, John Walsh's son, was murdered by Jeffrey Dahmer. With me right now, I have Willis Morgan, the author of Frustrated Witness, the complete story of Adam Walsh, and he wrote the very, very good, very compelling book about on the subject. So how's it going, Willis?
It's going good, and I see you got a haircut today.
Yeah, it was getting really bad. It was getting really bad. It was getting to the point to where I couldn't even. I could spend 20 minutes brushing it, and it would
well, looks better today.
Be a mess again. So.
Plus, it's hot.
I could go another day. Oh yeah, but so tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and just how you came to put yourself in this situation.
All right. Well,
as being a frustrated witness.
Right. Exactly. It starts back from 1972 when I got out of the Air Force and I moved down to Miami. And I took a job working for the Miami Herald. And I was going on my 10th year in 1981. And we were working 4-day work weeks. That's 40 hours, 10-hour shifts. And my off days were Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And so on Monday, July 27th, 1981, I decided to go to the Hollywood Mall to have lunch there. And I stopped off in Radio Shack while I was there, and that's when somebody came into Radio Shack and tried to start a conversation with me that became so bizarre that I was watching him. I actually watched him walk into the toy department in Sears because he stomped out of the Radio Shack when I wouldn't respond to him. And I actually saw this guy walk into Sears, and I was watching him because I knew he was going to go up to somebody. And I was wondering, if they might need help or what their reaction would be. But in 1981, never did I think.
What if he walked up to a little old lady or something and started messing with her,
Yeah.
I didn't know who he was.
I had no idea. I was thinking he was going to go up to somebody my age. I was 34 at the time. And I didn't know how old he was. But when I went to the police, to describe this guy, I described him as being about 21. Or 20, I think it was, is what I told the police. But 10 years later, I found out he was 21 years old. So I was pretty close on the age. But anyway, I actually saw him walking into the toy department. But at that point, I turned around and left and went home. It was that very evening that I heard about on TV, on the news. They were talking about a boy that went missing from that mall. Then they mentioned the Sears and the toy department. Then they mentioned the time of the day, which was around 12:30. And then that's when a chill went down my spine, and I knew it had to be that guy. I just didn't know who that guy was. He never told me his name. But I knew it had to be that guy. This guy was so bizarre, and he was in the same time, place, and location where Adam was abducted from. And I've never followed anybody in my life. This was the one and only time that I've ever done that. And I mentioned that because the police told me when I went to them, well, what are you doing following somebody? And, I don't go around following people, but this guy was really bizarre. So I knew it had to be that guy. I just didn't know who he was. Back then in 1981.
So then you have then everything gets put together. They start putting together a case, investigating, and all that stuff. And then at that point, did you went to them to give a statement?
I did, yes. And I felt like a jerk for even wasting my time going there because they just blew me right off. They asked me if I had a tag number of the vehicle, and I tried to explain to them this was inside the mall. I'd never seen anything outside the mall. And then they asked me if I had a receipt to prove I was there, and I didn't have a receipt because I'd never bought anything. Even if I would have went to lunch there at the German deli where I was going, I would have not had a receipt. I
Yeah,
most likely would have
you
kept
would
the
have thrown the
receipt.
receipt away.
Yeah, I would not even taken it. But the thing is, I didn't have a receipt. They just blew me off. What they did was they told me, okay, well, we'll call you if we need you. And they took my information. They asked me, for a description of the guy. Like I said earlier, I gave him the age, height, and they asked me about his accent and all that. And they said they would call me, and they never called me. And then when I was going back to work, composites started coming in. And I knew that some of those composites that came out were the same guy that I encountered. And my thinking was whoever gave that composite saw the same guy. And some of those composites are in my book, as you have seen. And so
Right.
my thinking was, well, at least they have the composite. And there's nothing more I can offer. So I let it go. I didn't bother doing anything. And a while later, since I worked for a newspaper, I was reading the paper every day on my work days. And I was reading about this friend of John Walsh, who was living in John Walsh's house, James Campbell, and they were going after him with a vengeance and trying to pin this on him. And my thinking then was, I knew it couldn't have been him. I didn't even see a photo of him, but I knew because the articles were saying that, Adam was targeted because there was something going on between John and the family, and they were thinking this was a thing out of revenge to, you know, against John. And I knew that story didn't pan out because this guy came up to me first, number one, and he was meandering around the mall before he ended up in the toy department. So I knew Adam wasn't targeted. And my thinking was if they ever charged this guy, I would come to his aid, you know. And but they never charged him,
Right.
so I never bothered doing anything else.
Yeah.
And several years.
So
No, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say several years
Okay. So
later.
so
Are we
yeah.
talking
Go
over
ahead.
each other? Okay. No, I was going to say several years later, Ottis Toole injected himself into the case, and he became a suspect, a prime suspect. But that only lasted about 4 months, and they completely dismissed him.
But he wasn't going to go away, though. They at the end of everything, as far as they were concerned, Ottis Toole was the guy.
Right, but that wasn't those detectives at that time. There was a new police chief
Right.
that came in, I think it was like 2007, that became the police chief, and there was the original detective, one of the original detectives that injected himself into the case. They hired him. His name is Joe Matthews, but they hired him right in the beginning of the abduction because they hired him to do a polygraph exam of the Walshes. He worked for the Miami Beach Police Department, and he had a company called the Southern Institute of Polygraph, and they hired his company to do the polygraphs of James Campbell. And so years later, he's the one that had pinned this on Ottis Toole and had the police department close the case. But all the original detectives, Bill, you read their statements in my book. None of them believed Ottis Toole was guilty.
No.
They all dismissed him.
And
You
not
know, I
only
didn't even
that,
talk to them.
not only that, they Ottis Toole was driving a white Cadillac, but every single one of the witnesses that was outside reported a blue van.
Exactly. Not only from that location, but other locations as well. And police chiefs from other cities
Yeah.
were calling them and saying, hey, this abduction matches an attempted abduction in our city. And they were dismissing the police chiefs as well as other witnesses from other locations that were calling them. So
Yeah.
if the
So
case was
so I
messed
want
up
to
really bad.
backtrack.
No, go
I want
ahead.
to backtrack a little bit because when I was reading through this, I mean, I've heard the Jeffrey Dahmer story 100 times, but one thing that I didn't know was that he was a suspect in lots of sex worker murders in Germany when he was stationed there, and um, that we were talking. It's just like that. That's basically a very strong coincidence. He probably didn't do that. I mean, it's likely that there was a serial killer, another serial killer in operation at that time. But just the coincidences that he was there when this was going on. Like specifically, tell us about the train.
Oh yeah, well, Dahmer went to Munich, Germany, for Oktoberfest, and he took a train back, and he never made it back to his base because he was like a day late when he came back. He claimed that he got off at the wrong stop, but on that train, it was headed for Dusseldorf, and there was a murder on that train, and the suspect pulled the cord to stop the train and jumped off the train right after he got caught in the middle of murdering someone. That's the suspect. I'm not saying it was Dahmer yet, but Dahmer gets back to his base and he admitted he was on the train, that he got off at the wrong station, but he never mentioned anything about anybody else pulling the cord to get off at that station where he got off. So, you know,
Right.
very, very, coincidentally that, Dahmer would be there on that same train when that happened. And there are other incidents in Germany,
Yeah.
but at this time, I don't know that anything could be definitively connected to Dahmer. But there's a lot of
Right.
coincidences.
It's
And
just a coincidence.
yeah, and the fact that
And he
Dahmer
did.
lied so many times to the police, in Milwaukee when they interviewed him, like the Thanksgiving in 19, I believe it would be 1978, when um, he was invited to a Thanksgiving dinner with some other soldiers. I think there was a total of about five of them by his sergeant who lived off base. And as it turned out, Dahmer didn't like the sleeping arrangements, so he stormed out of the house of Carlos Cruz, Sergeant Carlos Cruz, and he stormed out, and he was gone for about 4 hours. And this was a freezing blizzard outside, and with sub-zero temperatures. And 4 hours later, he shows up with blood all over him. And when they asked him what happened, he says, "You can't talk about it." And then it turns out there were several women murdered on a base nearby. So, just more and more, too many coincidences to,
Right.
not to think that Dahmer was just because Dahmer's statements when he was interviewed about Germany, he said that he lived among a lot of soldiers. He never went off base. He never had time to do anything. But obviously, he did go off base. And the reason they found out about
Yeah.
that Thanksgiving dinner is because Carlos Cruz called the Milwaukee Police Department. And that's why they questioned him about that. And then when they questioned him, they asked him, "Why did you tell us you never went off base? We just had somebody calling us and said that you went to their house for Thanksgiving." He goes, "Oh, yeah, now I remember going there." And he says, "But I never left the house." Well, you have his sergeant saying he did leave for 4 hours, and you have other soldiers there that claim that also say he did leave, and he was gone for about 4 hours. And they also say not only did he have blood on him, but his coat wasn't cold; it was warm to the touch, for being out in
So he
sub-zero
had been
weather for 4 hours.
somewhere.
Yeah, and also you have another soldier who claims that he was in Heidelberg with him when he arrived. They were at different bases. They went through basic training together, and he was in the bunk right next to Dahmer's bunk. And Dahmer also said that while he was in basic training, he never made it to the military police school because he only lasted, less than a month in basic training before he got kicked out. And he said that when he was in Germany, Dahmer looked him up, and they met up in Heidelberg with a number of other soldiers. So again, Dahmer denied that. So he's lied about so many things. Even in Milwaukee, he claimed he never owned a gun, and then when they found out that he did own a gun, he says now, yeah, he remembers he did buy the gun. They said, well, why did you tell us you never owned a gun? And he said, well, because I didn't think it was relevant. It doesn't matter whether you think it's relevant or not. He told him he never had one, which is a lie. So he lied, and they just brush it off. Everything he says, they just let it go because nobody wants to make Dahmer a bigger monster than what he was, because they didn't want to reveal their own mess ups. As you know, there was another. Huh?
Could you fix your camera? It's cutting.
Oh, am I out of lens? It's not the camera; it's me. I was leaning.
Yeah. Oh. So let's. So it's just like, basically, we don't have anything other than the composite sketch, and it's just like there's people. It's like, okay, it was not Ottis Toole, it was not a white Cadillac, it was a blue van. The van turned out to be like a work van from the pizza shop that Dahmer worked at, and Dahmer was known to have driven this van quite a bit. And so we've got all of that. That's all there is about the case and whoever this guy is. That all changes the day that Dahmer gets arrested.
Also don't forget about the police report with Dahmer's name all over it. From where he was working, Dahmer found, or I should say, Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer, because that's what they call him on the police report, because Jeffrey Dahmer is just a witness. What happened was, when he left the military, he came to Miami, and after about a month, he ran out of money, and he started dumpster diving for food. He was behind this strip mall, dumpster diving for food, and the manager of the strip mall was taking the garbage out, and he saw him out there eating, and he says, he asked him, he says, hey, you hungry? And he brought Dahmer a sub, made him a sub, and brought it out to him. And a few days later, he saw him out there again eating out of the dumpster, and he asked Dahmer if he needed a job, and he actually hired Jeffrey Dahmer. His name is Ken Halbert. He hired Jeffrey Dahmer as a busboy in his sub shop called Sunshine Subs. And Ken says that about 10 days after he hired Jeff, obviously it was Jeff's turn to take job to take out the garbage. So when he was taking the garbage out at the end of his shift around 5 o'clock, he came back into the sub shop and he told Ken, he says, hey, Ken, in a very matter-of-fact tone, Ken said, he says, by the way, Ken, there's a dead man next to your dumpster. So Ken goes out to look, and sure enough, there's a dead guy there, so he calls the police. And naturally, the first thing the police ask is, who found the body? And they said, my busboy. So he said, well, get him out of here. We need to talk to him. And that's how he got his name all over this police report. And so Ken says it was about 10 days after he hired him. And if you look on the police report, it says July 7th. Okay? Which means that he would have been hired around June 27th, 10 days previous, right? Before that. So June 27th, Dahmer was hired at this sub shop, and Adam was abducted exactly 1 month later on July 27th. So
have they ever figured out who the dead guy was and who killed him? Or
yes,
has that ever been figured out?
Yes. Dahmer said he went by the name of Bobby. When the police did a background check with fingerprints, he had a long arrest record, and that's how they were able to figure out who the guy was. His arrest records were just mostly misdemeanors, trespassing and disorderly conduct and stuff like that. And so they found out who the guy was, but the guy had no blood on him. And when I went to get the police report, And I was reading the police report, and I saw the address on there. That's how I found the sub shop and the meter room. And I went in there, and eventually there was a TV crew that came down here to do a TV episode of on ABC primetime, and they did a TV episode, and they found all the blood spatter on the back wall, and they had a CSI expert. She's the one that found that blood spatter, and she described it as being indicative of a high velocity homicidal pattern, and she even described how the homicide would have had to occur. She was saying there had to have been a body on the floor with some, heavy chopping motions to cause the blood to go up the wall like that. And that guy, Bobby, he had no blood on him, so it wasn't his blood. So whose blood could have it been? And, I'm saying that the most likely the person that the blood could have belonged to is Adam. Because I was positive that Jeffrey Dahmer was the one that abducted Adam. And my thinking would be, where would you bring somebody after you abduct a child? You bring someplace that you're familiar with. But the police refused to investigate. That's why on my book cover, the hard copy that you have, it says crime scene, do not investigate, because they refuse to investigate. In fact, the Hollywood Police Department, they claimed that they believed 2 pit bulls got in there and had a fight and caused that blood spatter. And then the Miami Police Department, yes, because this is in Dade County, the meter room. When I talked to the chief homicide investigator over there, he told me that he thinks a bird flew into the wall. So
yeah,
they don't want Dahmer to be a suspect, because that would reveal the full extent of their incompetence.
Well, we can touch on that. I don't want to like give the whole story like in a nutshell. I want people to buy your book.
Okay.
So let's go now to because it doesn't start getting like really super screwy until Dahmer is arrested in in Milwaukee, and
Right.
that's when you're like, that's the guy, and that's when a lot of the other witnesses are like, that's the guy, that's him.
Right.
And they went to like some were interviewed by the police, some were not, and they were all just basically like, no, it's Ottis Toole.
Yeah.
And now one thing I'm curious is, has John Walsh ever said anything about the possibility of Dahmer being the one that did it?
No. John Walsh is completely sold on Ottis Toole. This detective, his name is Joe Matthews. Okay, the one that had the polygraph, Southern Institute of Polygraph. He gave John Walsh the polygraph exam, and completely eliminated John Walsh as a suspect, as well as James Campbell as a suspect. John Walsh's house guest. And then several years later, in I believe it was 87, John Walsh was chosen to be the host of America's Most Wanted. And this detective heard about that, and he called John and befriended him and reminded him that he was the one that exonerated him. And John Walsh ended up hiring this detective as the senior lead investigator on that TV show, America's Most Wanted. So now John Walsh had this detective feeding him this false Ottis Toole narrative. He's the only one that believes it was Ottis Toole, that's saying it was Ottis Toole. None of the original detectives. I have all their quotes. I have one detective that I talked to personally, second lead chief detective, Hickman, Ron Hickman. I called him, and he passed away recently, but I called him and when he was living in Middleburg, Florida, a suburb of Jacksonville. And when I told him that they closed the case, and the chief said that detectives past and present all believed it was Ottis Toole when they closed the case on national TV. And his response was, well, they know I don't. And then I also have his statements in the case files that he said. So none of them believe it was Ottis Toole. It's only this one detective that convinced John Walsh that it was Ottis Toole, and John is sold on the idea.
So Adam Walsh's head was found in a canal right next to Florida's Turnpike. Then it was mile marker 130, and there were two truck drivers that saw a blue van there on the side of the road with a person walking down toward the little dock that was built there. And that's where a day or two later, the head was found. But as far as but the thing about that is that particular area, that is a very long stretch of turnpike where there is absolutely nothing. It's like 40 miles from the Fort Pierce exit up to Yeehaw Junction, and where he was, that's now mile marker 174. But that's still 20 miles away from Yeehaw Junction. So he would have had to drive, unless he cut across the median, he would have had to drive all the way up to Highway 60 at Yeehaw Junction, 20 miles, just to get off and come back.
Well, not quite.
Unless he cut across the median.
Yeah, as a truck driver, there's a stop just north of that.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. But that's
and you can ask that, because I've gone up to that location many times, and I go just a few miles past it.
Yeah,
went around into that.
There's the service aisle, the service plaza.
Yeah, there's a service plaza there.
Yeah, I forgot.
So you can, yeah.
How the hell did I forget that?
Yeah, and you're a truck driver.
I've only been there 100 times.
And it's a nice truck. It's a nice service stop. It's probably one of the better ones.
Yeah.
They have a lot of stores in there.
They keep those things pretty well.
Yeah.
So he could have turned around there.
Yeah, most likely.
That's only about 10 miles away from where that was.
And don't forget, there were 4 witnesses that saw a white male at that location with a blue van. At one witness, I should say, because when they closed the case. Okay, let me backtrack a little bit. When they closed the case, I finally managed to get a copy of the CD-ROM, 2 CD-ROM, or 3. It was three with all the case files. Okay, and I started looking through them, but I contacted the witnesses from not only that location but all these other locations. And Dennis Bubb, one of the witnesses that saw a truck, blue van, I should say, parked in the swale area there. He was a truck driver for the Publix supermarket chain. And he saw a blue van parked in the swale area and a white male, on the bridge. There's a little bridge there on the canal. That bridge was there because they used it to monitor the water depth. There was a little box there that kept track of the water. And I've
seen those boxes.
So he saw a white male with a bucket, a white bucket, taking something round out of the bucket and tossing it into the water. So what Dennis did was he called another Publix truck driver that was a few miles behind him, or a couple minutes behind him, and asked him to check it out. And his name is Clifton Ramey. So when he passed, he checked it out, and his statement is that he saw the hood up. No, I'm saying, I take that back. The hood wasn't up. He was thinking that the truck was broke down. He thought the guy was getting water because maybe he had an overheated radiator, but he didn't see the hood up on the truck. So he didn't really know what was going on, but he saw the reason he could see this guy fumbling around because he was already back at the blue van. And he could see him fumbling around with a white bucket inside the van because he had the dome light on. You know, when you open the side door on the van, the light comes on automatically. And so he had the light on, and so he was able to see. Plus, as you know, when you're in a Publix truck, you're sitting up high, so you can look down and get a pretty good view. And he saw the guy fumbling around with a white bucket inside the van. And so I asked Dennis when I contacted him if he ever called the a police department. Well, obviously he didn't, because that's how he got his name. It's in the case files. But the only thing that was in there was his phone call that he made to the police, and there was not much more than that there. It was just a name and a phone number. And that phone number was no good anymore anyway. So I actually had to drive to his place to find him after I looked him up. And so I asked him, I said, did they ever call you back when you made that phone call? And he says, yes, about an hour later. I said, what did they say? And he said, well, I told him about the guy on the pier, bridge, on that little bridge with a bucket. And I told him about the blue van. And their response was, yeah, we already know about the blue van. It has nothing to do with the Adam Walsh case. This was their response to him. And Clifton Ramey said the same thing. He called also, and then they gave him similar statements. And my personal opinion is the reason for this is they didn't have one person in charge, and they even had John Walsh taking phone calls, and nobody was in charge. So if there would have been one person in charge, knowing that all these people are calling in from all these locations about a blue van, maybe they would have put something together. But they never were able to do that.
Yeah. So when the head was found, it was found by a couple fishermen, and they thought that it was a doll head. And you can file that under the, that's just like a mannequin. It's never a mannequin. It's never a doll's head.
Well, yeah. But, when I head to the water and the hair is all sopped and wet, and, believe me, I've seen the photos. I've been to the Hollywood Police Department doing a FOIA request to look at the photos, and they're really gruesome. And, yeah, I could see how that could happen, because, keep in mind, nobody's ever going to be thinking the first thing on their mind that it's a human head, So I could understand how they could have thought that.
Well, yeah, but in true crime stories, I was like, well, they saw something that at first they thought was a mannequin. It's never a mannequin.
Well, a doll's head or a mannequin is similar. Yeah.
Yeah, but so I'm trying to. Whoa, what's that?
That was my phone. I forgot to turn it off.
That was loud.
Oh.
But
okay, it's off.
But when they have so you start approaching the Hollywood Police Department, and they were you're basically beating down the door to everything, and they're basically just telling you, don't call us, we'll call you. You can go away, and at that point, before too long, they start getting pissed at you. So that's when you start going and talking to all these other witnesses yourself, and basically putting your files together, your whole case, which is the basis for your book. So yeah, we could talk for 2 hours just based on all of the craziness that came out of that police department. I mean, I tried to make a Dick Darwin segment for this, and I couldn't. Yeah, I don't even think Dick Darwin would approve of the way they handled that. But
well,
that
let me
happens from time
say
to time.
something.
But
Bill,
then,
I think the incompetence is because they messed up so bad, they went into cover-up mode. I always say, when you mess up, never fess up. And that's what they're doing. Milwaukee's doing the same thing. There was a man murdered in the same building where Dahmer was. Okay, where he was living, in the Oxford building in Milwaukee. And that was like 4 months before he was captured. And this was an open murder case. And the police in Milwaukee were convinced it had to be somebody within the 49 units of that building because they had a locked door. You know, it was one of those buildings where they don't have security, but they have an intercom system, and you have to call up to the apartment and they can buzz you in. That's the only way you can get in, or you have to have a key, one of those two, if you're a resident. So they were convinced it had to be somebody. They even went to Dahmer's apartment and questioned Dahmer about it. And Dahmer was freaking out when they were questioning him because he had two dead bodies in his bedroom at the time. And Dahmer claimed he didn't know the guy, but then I called his neighbor who lived across the hallway from him, and she says that she told the police she believes that Dahmer murdered Dean because she saw Dahmer that day, just hours earlier, going with Dean back to Dean's apartment. Dean lived in an apartment, I think it was on the third floor. Dahmer was on 213 on the second floor. So she seen Dean, so she told the police, and the police still brush it off. They don't want to make him a Dahmer murder. So you won't see, you know, Dahmer's only responsible, according to the police records, for 17 murders. Dean Vaughn is not one of them. So, you know, there goes another one right there.
Yeah, I don't understand. You know, it's just like you get cases like Jeffrey Dahmer. You get cases like Peter, what's his name? Peter Sutcliffe in over in London, or I think it was somewhere in the United Kingdom. But you know, they're living in apartments and they're stashing bodies in apartments and whatnot, and they have that smell, and they always have a way to justify it.
Yeah.
And in a lot of these cases, like Dahmer, like Sutcliffe, I can't.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar.
I can't remember how to pronounce his name, but people were complaining about the smell. You would think that they would come and do an investigation just after like the 10th person called up and said, "Hey, it smells like death," and you know, coming out of that apartment. I don't.
And that's what they
that
did.
Would never happen in Florida.
Right? You know, they were in that building so many times before Dahmer was captured, and that's one of the things they're trying to.
They had to have smelled. They had to have smelled. Yeah, they had to have smelled it.
Did.
I mean, you know,
they did. People were calling all the time about this thing. You know, the woman that was next to Dahmer, she had to be moved to another apartment. She kept complaining so much to management, and the police were constantly being called. In fact, one time, the police responded, and they thought there was somebody that died in one of the apartments, and they kicked the door in. And that apartment was only a couple doors down from Dahmer's. They kicked the wrong door in. They didn't find anything, and they just let it go. They left. And Dahmer was, again, freaking out, you know, because of all the commotion in the hallway. But they never went to Dahmer's apartment that time. So, yeah, and then finally they gave a little boy back to Dahmer when he escaped.
Yeah.
Conrad Simpson phone. He escaped, and the two black girls that found him naked out in the street called the police. The police survived, and they threatened the girls with arrest if they don't take off because Dahmer showed up and kept saying that's his 19-year-old lover, and the girls were saying, "Look at him, he's not 19, he's just a little boy," you know. And the police threatened them with arrest if they didn't take off. And then finally, after Dahmer was captured, you know, they called the police back. That's when the police realized how bad they messed up, and they didn't want the public to know how many times they were in the Oxford building because the black community, all the minority communities, the black, the Asian, because Simpson phone was Laotian, and then also the gay community because a lot of the victims were gay, and they didn't want them to know. They were all out in huge numbers, and they were afraid there were going to be riots. So they were trying to minimize Dahmer's crimes. And the only one he's ever got charged with are the ones that were in his apartment that, you know, they have to charge him with those. How can you deny something when you find the skulls in there, you know? And then Stephen Hicks. Because Dahmer admitted to Stephen Hicks. So I think the only reason Dahmer admitted to Stephen Hicks is because he kind of sensed Dahmer wasn't stupid. He was smart. He kind of sensed the police would end up going to his grandmother's house because that's where he was living before he moved to the Oxford building, and he kind of probably sensed they would probably end up finding Stephen Hicks' remains on the property, so that's why he admitted to it. But those are the only ones. 17. Dean Vaughn is not a murder victim of Dahmer's. Adam Walsh is not, and neither is Bobby John Doe, the derelict that was found by Jeffrey Dahmer, quote unquote, behind the store where he worked. Those are not Dahmer victims. So that's 3 victims right there, and there's other people that have said that they believe there's many more victims.
There definitely could be. So, the fascinating part, of this is after Dahmer is arrested, and and when you really start going at them, just tell us a little bit, about the about the sheer lunacy. I know what Harris. That's the guy that wrote the book.
Yeah. Jeffrey Dahmer.
Where he said Jeffrey Dahmer and Ottis Toole were part of this this human trafficking ring.
Yeah. I mean that's such a farce and a joke. I mean that guy's got something wrong with him right there. His whole story.
It is, and what I was thinking, when I was reading that part of the book, other than really, because nobody even knew who Jeffrey Dahmer was at this point. Jeffrey Dahmer hadn't even killed anybody, at this point that we know of. Other than there's possibly that guy in the dumpster, but he hadn't really killed anybody. So how is he going to be part of this? And one thing that I was, surprised did not come up is how, when he was talking about Dahmer and Ottis Toole working together, why didn't they? He said it could have come up that they were that they were both together, part of that Black Hand organization that Ottis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas were part of. I don't know why they didn't try to pin that on as further proof that the Black Hand organization existed.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either, but yeah, I mean that's.
You're not familiar with the Black Hand?
I've heard about it.
Black Hand with Ottis
For me,
Toole?
I don't get too much into Ottis Toole because he's really irrelevant, to this case, other than the fact that he tried to inject himself.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, Ottis Toole is not the only one that tried to inject himself in this case. There were others. They were just able to pin their location down on July 27th, 1981. Most of them were in prison already, just trying to do like Ottis Toole did. Get out of prison for a little bit, and get some extra smokes, cigarettes, and, coffee and whatever else they give them while they're doing an interview and, interrogation. So.
Yeah, we covered Ottis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas last year.
Well,
and
I'll tell you a good guy to contact is Tim Gilmore. He wrote the book Stalking Ottis Toole. If you're not familiar with that, I don't know, but look that book up, Stalking Ottis Toole, and give Tim Gilmore. He can tell you a lot about Ottis Toole and his time in Jacksonville.
Well, the thing, when we covered, I'm just going to give another podcast a plug here right now since it's kind of on topic. When we covered Henry Lee Lucas, we talked briefly about the Black Hand thing, but if you really want to hear a really good breakdown about what the Black Hand was supposed to be, listen to last podcast on the left. They did a 4-part series on Henry Lee Lucas. Part 3, they go into everything that the Black Hand was supposed to be, and it's insane. Because it was all bullshit. It was all shit. It was all stuff that Henry Lee Lucas and Ottis Toole had made up.
Yeah. Right. They were making up all kinds of confessing to all kinds of murders everywhere. So I don't believe he murdered anybody other than the one guy. John Sonnenberg, is that his name? That was died of third-degree burns from a building that Ottis Toole set on fire in
I
Jacksonville.
mean, he was. Yeah. Well, I think that he assisted Henry Lee Lucas on some of the victims that Henry Lee Lucas actually did. But another thing that fascinated me in that book was the relatives of Ottis Toole that came forward that believed that he was the one that killed,
Right.
you know, Adam Walsh. But the thing, and it's like I don't understand why they would say that unless they're just pissed off about the fact that Ottis Toole, based for all intents and purposes, let Henry Lee Lucas take his cousin. I can't remember her name,
Yeah.
Annie, I think it was, or Sin. But why would they, you know, are they trying to get a little bit of revenge on him for
Oh,
allowing that to happen? But the thing is Ottis Toole wasn't with Henry Lee Lucas and her when he killed her.
right.
That, but
Well, if you listen to their
but he
statements,
allowed it to happen.
right. But if you listen to their statements, they all said also that they don't know for sure. They just heard it all on TV that he's responsible, and that's what they're going by, and they believe he did it. I mean, Sarah Patterson, here's what Joe Matthews does. Okay, when he wrote his book, Bringing Adam Home, pinning Adam's murder on Ottis Toole, he was claiming, for instance, that people that passed away made statements that they didn't make. And, when somebody's passed away, you can't question them. For example, everybody knows about the deathbed confession that Ottis Toole supposedly made. Even John Walsh believes Ottis Toole made a deathbed confession. And in Joe Matthews' book, he said that Sarah Patterson, Ottis Toole's niece, called and said she went to visit Ottis Toole when he was passing away, and she's the one that he gave the confession to, the deathbed confession. But Sarah Patterson passed away, like I said. There's no way to talk to her. She passed away in the early 50s. But she did give, while she was still alive, a statement under oath to the state attorney's office in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And in that statement, she calls Detective Matthews an idiot and a jerk. And she claims that she doesn't know anything about the deathbed confession. And the date that the last time she visited her uncle was 9 months before he passed away, in December of he passed away in September of 1996, right? Ottis Toole. And so it was in December, the previous December, that she visited him. It was like 9 months before he passed away. So that's not a deathbed confession. So this guy's just making up stories.
No.
I mean, she wouldn't have said that under oath if that wasn't true. And another one is the Barry Grimilli, who was in charge of the infirmary where Ottis Toole passed away. In Joe Matthews' book, he claims that Barry called him, at America's Most Wanted. Remember, he's a senior lead investigator. That's why he's getting these calls.
Right.
So he called him and told him that he overheard Ottis Toole giving the deathbed confession. But Barry also gave a statement under oath. Okay, and in my book, I mention it, and I tell you right where to go find it, because I have both of the websites right in my book. You can with QR codes, you can scan them, go right to the website, and in his
Pretty cool how you did that, though. That's
pretty
innovative.
Technology is always getting better. But anyway, in his statement, he said, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, okay, Bill? This is what Barry says. He says, I was watching TV one night, and I was watching America's Most Wanted when John Walsh came on and started shaking his finger in the camera and saying that, his son was killed, and Ottis Toole confessed to it, and he was saying in his statement, he goes, but that's not true. Ottis Toole never confessed to anybody. He never even talked about the case. So which is it? Joe Matthews, what he's saying, or Barry Grimilli under oath in his statement. So there's another one that he's just made up. He's making up witnesses. And other witnesses, that he makes up are Ottis Toole's cellmates. He's claiming that they all claim that Ottis Toole murdered Adam. And their statements are like, well, everybody in prison knows it, it's common knowledge. That's not a witness. These are not witnesses.
Well, another thing that I didn't know about Ottis Toole in this case and everything was his involvement with Gerard Schaefer. He is the cop from St.
Martin
Louis
County.
I think it was Martin. Yeah,
Martin County.
He was he was a sick.
Yeah, right. They call him the cop
He
killer.
was a sicko. We're gonna cover him again, at some point. But
Well, you ought to get a hold of Sandra London.
I already pay Sandra London.
Oh, okay.
That's another story, though. I did a heavy metal version of Danny Rolling's song "Mystery Rider," so I have to pay her royalties because she owns Danny Rolling's estate. Yeah, we did a really long episode on Danny Rolling and about a 30-minute piece on Sandra London as well.
No, that must be interesting.
Yeah, we got to finish the story and but Schaefer came out and said that he did, that Ottis Toole did. Then he came out and said he didn't. Then he kept changing his story.
Yeah,
and I did not even know that. I didn't even. I mean, I knew that they were in prison around the same time, along with Ted Bundy. I think Danny Rolling too, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that Schaefer had basically come out and made statements about Ottis Toole and Adam Walsh. I had no.
Right.
I didn't know that happened.
Well, that was a pretty infamous death row, as we were talking about the other day. You had Ted Bundy there, you had Dan Rawlings, you had Schaefer there, you had Ottis Toole. You had some pretty infamous people on that death row. But also in that confession letter that Ottis Toole supposedly wrote and sent to John Walsh, and that trying to get money out of John Walsh, extorting money from him. If you'll notice on that letter that there was a little X where Ottis Toole signed his name. Who writes a letter and then puts an X where they sign their name? So obviously that was Schaefer that wrote that letter. And
right.
Yeah, and Ottis Toole, all he did was sign his name by the X. So that has nothing to do with Ottis Toole. I don't know why John Walsh believes that. John Walsh said they could have gotten a conviction on Ottis Toole based on that letter alone. Any prosecutor would never, as soon as they see that X on there, sign here. That would have never gone anywhere.
X marks the spot.
Yeah, exactly. But at least Ottis Toole was able to sign his name.
Yeah. So tell you you had a like a really explosive encounter with the Hollywood Police Department where they were basically acting like Jeffrey Dahmer's attorney.
Exactly.
As far as defending him and treating you like you were a defendant or something. At one point they even hinted, well, maybe you did it. Yeah.
No, I finally got an interview with the Hollywood Police Department after, bugging them for so many years, and so what happened was I called and I tried to get an interview, but they wouldn't give me one. They didn't want to do that. So I kept calling other departments. I called this, the sheriff's office, and I called the coroner's office, and all these people kept calling the Hollywood Police Department, telling me that they would have to confer with the Hollywood Police Department before they give me an interview. So finally, when they called me back, Detective Lyle Bean called me, And he goes, okay, I'm going to give you that interview now. It was like that. So finally I go in there, and at one point Bean jumps up and flailing his arms about and says, for all I know, you could have done it. You just admitted you were there. Get up. It goes like that. like, get up, you're under arrest. He didn't tell me I'm under arrest, but he goes, get up. And then he backs up and folds his arm like a tough guy. You know how you fold your arms like that? And with a smirk on his face, he goes, so, how would you like it if I arrest you if you come back here again? So in other words, get out of here, don't come back again. And, anyways, that didn't go anywhere, that meeting. So I did respond. He says, when he folded his arm, he goes, so you think you want to come back here again? And I said, probably not without an attorney. He starts shouting at me again, going, oh, so now you need an attorney. Like that. And I said, man, I hope the whole meeting turned out to be a joke. Yeah, really bad. They're all in cahoots. The blue line, you don't cross it. So, and the courts are just as bad.
Tell us a little bit about tell us a little bit about the FBI plant that went. Went in there as pretending to be a mob.
Yeah, that was kind of funny, actually. Yeah, the FBI heard there was so much corruption at the Hollywood Police Department that they decided to do a sting operation on this police department. How many police departments have the FBI, putting plants in there for a sting operation? So they sent this big guy in there, and under a pseudonym, fake name. But anyway, he managed to get in there and befriend some of these people, and hired some of them to do move drugs from Port Everglades to warehouses, and they were all doing that. And then even one time he met at a restaurant, a small Italian restaurant in downtown Hollywood, and he was actually making drug deals with them, paying them off right in front of the police chief, and the police chief said nothing about it. And eventually they confided to the police chief that they had this sting operation going, and he leaked it to his underlings, who leaked it to all these police officers, and they had to call the operation off. So they netted 4 of them, and they said they would have gotten a lot more than 4. Then if the chief didn't leak the operation, but they had to call it off because for the safety of their agent. But anyway, they even offered them to move coke up to New York, and they were all willing to do that. Take truckloads of coke for I forget how much it was. I wrote it in the book, the amount, but it was like $15,000 a trip, and they were all jumping on it. And obviously, a lot of the transactions were made in the hotel room where he was staying, the FBI agent, and that room was rigged with cameras and mics and all that. So they recorded everything going on, and these cops were all willing to do that. That's how bad that police department was at the time. And part of the reason is they were hiring really bad cops. They were hiring, out of nepotism, they were hiring relatives that had criminal records. They couldn't get a job in any other police department. They were turned down in half a dozen police departments or more. Some of these officers, and Hollywood was hiring them. So they ended up with a lot of bad cops at the Hollywood Police Department at that time. So,
excuse me. So you first you put together a timeline of by virtue of what you saw and what you got in touch with other witnesses, what put together this timeline about what they saw and everything. You track down the van and everything and paired it up with this restaurant. You go to this restaurant, you find the meter room, and you and basically, everything pretty much lines up with with the possibility of him doing it, because of and kind of explain, you know, like take us through the meter room. I mean, we touched on the meter room a little bit earlier, but kind of take us through exactly how you found how you discovered the meter room. Um,
Well,
yeah.
let me backtrack a little bit and say that, one thing you'll notice in the book, that none of the witnesses, and there were numerous witnesses, none of their statements conflict with another witness. In other words, not one witness would say that that South Beach incident happened at the same time as another incident happened, in Deerfield Beach, for instance, or the incident in West Palm Beach. None of these incidents occurred at the same time, so none of the statements conflict with each other. And even after I contacted the witnesses, many of them that made composites, and I showed them the composite that they made from 1981, and they remember that day like it was yesterday, they tell me, and yes, that is the composite that they made, and yes, it was Jeffrey Dahmer that they were trying to describe, and a good example is that one in Riviera Beach, which is just north, a suburb of West Palm Beach, Terry Keaton, on a Monday, at the same time of day in a toy department, a mother took her child, Ginger Keaton, she took Terry to the Sears and left him in a toy department, exactly what Reve did, Reve Walsh. The only difference between the two incidences is that Ginger was buying a dress and Reve was buying a lamp. That's about the only difference. But she left her son there, and this guy came in to the toy department and tried to grab him. But he was 10 years old, so he managed to get away. And Adam was only 6. He couldn't get away at the Hollywood Mall. And so anyways, they paged his mother, and his mother came picked him up, and they were going to report the incident to security. And while they were in the hallway, they ran into Jeffrey Dahmer again. And Terry goes, "Mom, that's the man, that's the man." And so his mother said Dahmer stared her down and gave her this look that just sent shivers down her spine, and she just grabbed her son and got the heck out of there. She never did report it. And then until she got home. And I contacted them in around 2009, and they swear it was Jeffrey Dahmer. And long before I even contacted them, they were saying it was Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, Ginger's story about how Dahmer was, when he was captured, Terry jumped up out of his seat. They were in the living room watching TV and said, "Mom, that's the man, that's the man." So, there was no influence, for me to try and point towards Dahmer. A lot of these witnesses were all saying Dahmer was the person they were trying to describe. Now I lost track and forgot what you were saying. Something about the meter room. You wanted me to go back to that?
Yeah, because I think it's interesting how you how you found it.
Yeah, well, like
so I touched on it a little bit. I just want you to expand on it a little bit.
Yeah, well, like I said, Ken Halbert was saying that 10 days after he hired Jeffrey Dahmer, Dahmer's job was to take the garbage out, and Dahmer came back in and he called the police, and the police said, "Who found the body?" And he says, "My busboy." And they said, "Get him out here." And Dahmer ended up getting his name all over this police report. So
but how did you?
Right, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So anyway, when he said that 10 days after, I went down to Dade County Records Department to get the police report, and I got it. And when I was reading the police report, it had the date on there, July 7th. Okay, and Adam was abducted July 27th, and 10 days previous would have been June 27th. So that's when Dahmer had to be hired, and that's how I figured all this out. And when I saw that address on there, 17040 Collins Avenue in Sunny Isles, I made a beeline for that meter room. I knew that had to be the place. The address was on the police report. They say dead men don't talk. Well, sometimes they do talk through letters and police reports, like in this case. So, yeah, that's how I found the meeting room. The address was on that police report. I made a beeline for the meeting room, and I managed to get inside the meeting room under the premise that anything I do is legal unless I get caught. So I got in there. Yeah. So anyway, so I got in there and I ran back home. I drove back home, and it's about 8 miles from where I live. Not less than 8, maybe 6. But anyway, I went home. I got my camera. This is before cell phones, so I got my camera. I went back. I took pictures, and then I went to that reporter that you were talking about earlier, Art Harris, and I was telling him about this, and it took me like 3 days to convince him, because he kept saying, "No way, this had to be a dumpster feud," And I said, "No, Art, he was already working. He wouldn't be eating out of the dumpster." It took me 3 days to convince him, and unbeknownst to me, he went and called ABC Primetime, and that's when they sent a crew down here to do the TV show about the meter room. And in that TV show, Art is in there, because Art called me and asked me to stay away. There's no good if witnesses or get involved. So, yeah, I stayed away. But anyway, Art's in there, and he's describing the meter room as if he discovered everything in there. Like a snake in the grass, I call him. Because he's in there saying, I'm investigating the Jeffrey Dahmer case, then doors started opening up, and then a little door opens up, the door to the meter room. And that's how I discovered this. So, but anyway.
Instead of giving you such a hard time, the police department should have given you a badge.
Well, the police do not like when civilians come in and meddle in their cases, especially ones they couldn't solve.
I know.
Yeah.
If
they can't solve it, nobody solves it. That's their motto. So, yeah.
I mean, you did more police work on this than they did. I mean, they're sitting there. It's like, if Henry Lee Lucas had confessed to Adam Walsh's murder, instead of Ottis Toole, I'm pretty sure the result would have been the same. They would have found a way to put Henry Lee Lucas there when it happened.
And as you
even though he was in Texas at that point.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say, because as you know, Ottis Toole did try to pin it on Henry. And when they went back to Ottis Toole, when they went back to him and said, "Hey, we just checked out that Henry was in jail at that time," I don't think he was in Texas at that time. That time he stole a vehicle or something to do with a truck up in Virginia. Where was it? Maryland, I think. He was in jail. But anyway, he was in jail at that time. And so they went back to Ottis Toole, and Ottis Toole said, "No, I did it by myself." He finally changed his story. But he changed his story like a dozen times. Every time they catch him in a lie, he changed the story. Until they finally dismissed him. So,
but still, if they could have placed Henry Lee Lucas there at that time, they would have been all over it. Henry would have been all over it.
Right. Well, I mean, he could have confessed to Kennedy's assassination. They would have probably jumped on that too. Who knows? I mean, these people, just because somebody confesses,
Well, they did say that in part of that Black Hand thing, they did say that they were the people that brought the cyanide to Guyana.
I don't know anything about it, though. Yeah.
Yeah, that they said that they were the ones that delivered the cyanide to Jim Jones in Guyana.
The Kool-Aid.
The Flavor Aid. It was Flavor Aid. But it's just like the stories that they came up with. It's just unreal.
Yeah.
I think if there's anything else that we can cover.
I did file a lawsuit.
I don't want too much to get.
Yeah.
Away. Huh?
I did file a lawsuit against the Hollywood Police Department as well as that detective Joe Matthews. But
twice, right?
Yeah, well, one was an appeal because they threw my case out. So I appealed it to the 4th District Court of Appeals, and they rubber stamped the earlier court's decision. So they're all in cahoots, you know. So
I mean, you went all the way to the governor at the time,
I wrote to them.
and they're all just, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
they're all just like, we let the police department handle these
yeah,
matters all the
yeah.
way. If
Exactly.
Ron DeSantis had been the governor then, if Ron
Yeah, yeah,
DeSantis had been the governor then, he
yeah.
would have done something.
Well, they have a lot more important things on their plate to deal with. I'm sure people are sending them all kinds of letters all the time. They don't even directly respond. That's someone else responding.
Yeah, that's true.
And half the times you're getting, generic letters. So, but yeah, I've been to the FBI so many times too, and they all do the same thing. They tell me, well, you need to go to the Hollywood Police Department, the very people that are covering up. So that's why nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to talk about, Adam. Even these shows they do, like Netflix just did one not too long ago, and they barely mention Germany. They hardly mention Florida at all. They don't even talk about it. And not one Dahmer book. You read all these Dahmer books, like the Milwaukee Cannibal, all these books, and they barely don't even talk about Florida. He was here for 6 months. And he wasn't this guy that was working so many hours a day that he had no time to do anything, as he claimed when they asked him about his time in Florida. So, no, he was
Yeah.
going around.
Well, the as far as Dahmer is concerned, a lot of the attitude of a lot of people is that Adam Walsh was too young and too white for Jeffrey Dahmer,
Right, right.
and um, but and I mean that's kind of you know that was kind of my line of thinking too until I read this. It's like yeah, I mean, you put together a very compelling case and everything. Everything freaking makes sense, especially
Yeah,
with all of the witnesses basically saying the exact same thing. There's no telephone game here. There's no Mandela effect here. They all said the same thing.
yeah,
Because this guy stood out so much, and the
right.
blue van stood out so much that they weren't going to forget it. Like
Well,
it's like I can tell you every single thing that happened. During the when Challenger exploded.
right.
It was it was that detrimental of a thing that you're not going to forget it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
No, this gets
guarantee you that
etched into your brain forever.
any other kid that was out there on the schoolyard with me that saw this exact same thing is going to describe it the exact same way.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
so
yeah.
um,
Let me say something real
but
quick about
uh,
modus operandi, since you just mentioned it, okay? And Adam's age and all that. Now, when Dahmer was in Milwaukee, uh, Sensation phone, when he met him and brought him back to his apartment, and his earlier several years he uh, abducted, met his brother, Samson, on 25th Street, I think it was, in Milwaukee. And he was just walking down the street and saw him walking in the opposite direction and just stopped and asked him if he wanted to make some money. He ended up talking to him to coming to his apartment. He managed to get away. But do you think if he would have been younger, Dahmer would have not? Dahmer cared about his age. Dahmer didn't care about his age. His age was his age,
yeah,
and same thing with Adam. Keep in mind that he came up to me first. And who knows if he went up to anybody else that day before me, which is a very good possibility. But he came up to me first. And then when he stomped out, he was
do you think he was?
he was in predatory mode, if you know what I mean.
Do
Because
you,
that
do you,
that's
do
that's
you think he
the
was possibly sizing you up
oh,
to
he
possibly
was.
be a victim?
Yeah, no, now I at the time I was thinking he was just some nut guy that was really lonely. Really lonely. And I didn't want to play his psychiatrist or anything like that. But anyways, the thing is, he was in predatory mode. And when he met Adam, when he saw Adam and Adam was vulnerable, he just snatched him. You know, he's not going to ask somebody, how old are you? Are you at least, 12? Are you in puberty yet? No, he could care less how old somebody is. In fact, I believe he may have even murdered women in South Florida. I touch on that a little bit. some of the bodies that were in the coroner's office, you know. And Dahmer was riding around with a blue van. You know, there could have been hitchhikers that he picked up, and they never got back out of that van. Because they fit his MO, some of them, you know, according to the coroner.
Yeah.
So Ronald Wright was the coroner. And, yeah, when John Walsh asked him, because this is at a time before they found the severed head, between the time when Adam was abducted and they found the severed head. He was talking to Dr. Wright, and Dr. Wright told John, he says, John, listen, during this past month, we've got at least 4 women, young girls, 15 years old, 16 years old, in the morgue. And some of them were butchered brutally. You know, and apparently they may have been hitchhikers, and they're all Jane Does. So, you know, like I say, if Dahmer was riding around with that blue van at night, and he saw a hitchhiker, he would have picked that hitchhiker up just because he was so lonely, he wanted to be with somebody, anybody. If somebody was going to hitchhike and willing to get in the van, I believe he would have let them in the van. He wouldn't have cared if it was a woman, guy, black, white, Asian, Latin. They would have been a victim. So, MOs mean nothing. You know, after Ted Bundy was captured, you know, they had to rewrite the book on MOs. And if you remember, the DC snipers, they were looking for a military redneck, and as it turned, with a white man. And as it turns out, it was 2 Jamaicans. You know, one mentor and one student. So, MOs don't mean that much to me. It's just a general guideline, not much more.
Well, I mean, I will say that, you know, it's just, unfortunately, the only people that that know for sure are dead, and but I mean, I'm as close to believing this as I possibly could be.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you put together one hell of a case, but if the prosecuting attorney, you know, laid out your information, all it would be was circumstantial evidence and everything. And
well,
you know, convicted on that before,
circumstantial evidence is good if you have enough of it. Remember, DNA hasn't been around that long. You know, many people went to death row before the 1990s, and it was DNA.
You just reminded me of another question I had. That blanket that was in the meter room that was taken in. Did they lose that along with you know, Ottis Toole's car?
No, I took the blanket. I have the blanket, and I mean, well, not anymore. I gave it to Jan Johnson, the CSI expert, and she refused to give it back to me. So
that's right.
Yeah.
So either, I mean, there could have been DNA on that blanket.
Well, I kind of doubt that, but because I tried to get DNA out of the blood spatter on the wall, and that was impossible because of the time frame, the humidity. You know, the blood is on a mortared wall, and you know that's lime, and you know what that does. If you ever work with lime, it eats the skin off your hand. So it was impossible to get DNA, but it was the only thing. The closest we could get is that it did test positive for blood. So it is blood. It is a homicidal pattern. Somebody was murdered in that meter room for sure.
Right.
And, well, like I said, it wasn't that dead guy. So
right, because he wasn't bludgeoned.
Yeah. So you put that together. You know, that would have everything together. I do believe would have been enough to convict Jeffrey Dahmer. I believe there is enough evidence there. But Joey really heard all of that.
Yeah, I mean, people do. You know, people have been convicted on circumstantial evidence.
Right.
So I think you're.
And I'm telling you right now, Bill. And I'm telling you face to face right now. I was face to face with Dahmer. He was actually trying to have a conversation with me, and believe me, it was Jeffrey Dahmer, not anyone else. I didn't make a composite. But like I said, other
I've had a
witnesses.
similar experience with a. I've had a similar experience with a serial killer. I had a run-in with Ron Dominique in New Orleans. Didn't find out it was him until 20 some odd years later.
Oh, wow.
But
And yeah, how did you
it was
remember?
one of those things where
How did you know that was the guy? Then did you know you didn't know his name? Obviously, right?
Because I was listening to a podcast episode about him, very detailed. I'd heard like several other podcast episodes about him, but they didn't go into detail that the one that this one did.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm listening to it and I'm thinking that his MO sounded very familiar, and so I looked up, like, okay, when was I in New Orleans? Well, luckily I had watched the Dolphins play the Vikings, at a sports bar down there, and I looked, I found the date that I was there, and he killed somebody in New Orleans like 2 or 3 days after, I was there. I had this run-in with him, and some, and the things that he was saying to me, I'm just like, I'm like, this all sounds familiar. So I Googled the guy. It was him.
Yeah, but what I was asking is, at that time, you didn't know his name, did you?
No, I didn't. I had no
So
clue.
you only
It's just
remember
the things that he was saying.
right? You only remembered him 27 years later by your memory of his face. Is that what you're saying?
Because he was talking.
Because
he was,
right.
Yeah, we
Which
talked.
is what I'm saying.
We talked. He was
right.
Yeah.
Which is what I'm saying. I didn't know his name.
Once I did a Google image search on him after, it's just like his MO, because he was running his MO on me.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, this sounds really familiar. What he did? So I Google image him. Yeah, that was the guy.
yeah.
But
well, you've seen the composites.
I definitely.
Bill, you've seen the composites of Jeffrey Dahmer in my book, right? And you see the mugshot of Jeffrey Dahmer side by side, and the police tell me that they look nothing alike, And so I went.
Well, you know what?
I was going to say I went and got mugshots and composites of other serial killers, and that looks more alike Dahmer than some of these other composites.
Oh yeah, the one of Richard Ramirez looks ridiculous. Well,
because his eyes were bulgy. You got to keep in mind, at the time the composite was made, he may have been, strung out on some kind of heavy drug, But you say it looks ridiculous, but you can see that that's who they were trying to describe, Richard Ramirez. I can see that's who they were trying to describe, even though you could say that looks the least like the suspect.
I'm trying to find in the book so I can put it up here on camera.
Oh.
Do you know what page it was?
It's my book, and I
probably not.
Yeah. Oh. Well, page. Oh yeah, try 97. Page 97.
Yeah, found it.
Right. And that's just one composite. Right. And if you know, composites can vary also. As other witnesses that gave composites are a little, different than that. The mustache is a little thinner. And
but they're all similar.
They're all similar. And then, when, like I said, and after I contacted them, they all swear, yes, that's the guy they were trying to describe. That's him, Jeffrey Dahmer. So, and the police don't want to interview them, some of these witnesses. They refuse to. So, that's the sad part about this whole case. Nobody wants to solve it. And, when John Walsh himself doesn't want to solve it, obviously the police aren't going to solve it on their own. Now, if John Walsh was jumping up and down and screaming, yeah, they might do something. But they're not going to do anything for me. I have no standing. I have nothing, So, and
it's sad.
Yeah, another sad part about this is that many of the witnesses have passed on now. It's been over 40 years, so. And that's one reason I've done podcasts like we're doing now, and I've done them with some of these other witnesses, because I knew eventually some of them would pass on. At least I have their statements, recorded, so you can hear from them in their own voice. And so I put QR codes throughout the book, of other witnesses so you can hear them and listen to them. I thought that was pretty cool too, to be able to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that was groundbreaking at the time. That had never been done before, as far as I know. I
Me
mean,
too.
it's done now, but
Yeah, yeah,
as far as I know, when when you wrote the book, like
yeah.
when it
I
was
don't
published,
I don't think
that
it's
that hadn't been done before.
right. I don't think it's ever been done, even now, with a true crime book. Of course, it's been done with many other books, like gardening, and I've seen like music books. You see a lot of it with music books. Even in the old
Oh
days,
yeah,
even before QR codes, they would do it in a music book with a CD, a DVD in the back of the book in a sleeve. But in fact, originally when my
hmm
book came out in 2015, that's what I wanted to do was put a DVD. This is before QR codes, but I couldn't find a company to do it, and it would drive the price of the book up extremely high. So now with the QR codes, you scan it for free. It's right in there. You go right to the records, all the police files. My website where I do other interviews and podcasts with other witnesses. You can listen to them. So
yeah. All right. Well,
Amazon's got the
like
book
I
on
was saying,
sale. I was going to say
yeah,
Amazon's got
I'm gonna
the
link to it.
book on sale, 26% off right now. The hardcover.
Nice. Yeah, I'm gonna link to it in the notes for the show.
I appreciate it.
But yeah, I'm as close. It's very convincing. It's a really fun read. It there's times you're gonna be laughing. There's times you're gonna
Right.
be pissed off. There's I mean, and it's just like, and you're gonna start thinking. It's just like, you know, either yeah, either this is true, or Willis Morgan is one hell of a fiction writer, and I don't think you're a fiction writer.
Well, and you can see it can't be fiction when I reference their own case files, throughout the book.
Right,
And anybody can go check and see everything I'm saying is not made up. It's in the case files.
right. But so yeah, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure, and I want to say to the listeners, I do recommend this book, Frustrated Witness. It's you know you, it's a
So
really
the
nice
back
looking
cover,
book
flip
too.
it over for the back cover. The back cover, Bill. There you go. That's Adam right there.
Yep. So I think that I if you know John Walsh, buy him a copy of this book. I'm saying that to the listeners. I don't know John Walsh, so but thanks for coming on.
Right.
Uh, and I'm I'm gonna I'm gonna stop it, but we can continue to talk after to stop it. But thanks for coming on. It was really interesting. Um, the link is in the link for the book is in the comments, and you know thanks for listening, and until next time, later.